what spurred me to start writing the thing in the first place was that I discovered myself on stage turning into a monster. You know, I actually spat at some youth who was trying to scrabble up the front of the stage one day. And it was in the aftermath of that that I thought to myself, what am I doing? What's going on here? This doesn't feel right at all, you know. And that was really, that incident, which was in the Olympic Stadium in 1977 in Montreal, that incident really was the start, you know, was the catalyst for the start of writing the piece.
After I'd worked on Wish You Were Here and travelled with the show a bit, Roger then came to me with these tapes of the Wall, and we sat in this house here and listened to them. And he said at that point, I want to make an album, a road show, and then a film of the whole thing, and that was The Wall. And he described his idea of how a wall would be built across the stage to represent alienation between him, the performer, and the audience out there. In fact, alienation between all of us. It's all about barriers, the wall.
The second half of the show was just going to be a wall, you know, so we had to find ways that to make the second half of the show dramatic and also entertaining. My original idea was just to build a wall across the stage, and when it was finished, that was the end of the show. But then I decided that, well, maybe that was a bit too harsh, and that anyway, it would be a more interesting denouement if the thing was to be torn down at the end. And so we needed stuff to do on the outside of the wall, and animation seemed like a good thing to do.
It was quite extraordinary period, really, because what seemed to be, you know, fragmented ideas in the album actually were not that at all. It was very, very clear in Roger's head exactly what he wanted to say. And it was my job, actually, from the point of view of getting a screenplay, to make that cinematic.
The screenplay developed from conversations between Alan Parker and Jerry Scarf and myself in Jerry's house in Cheney Walk, where we would sit round and they would ask me, well, mainly Alan, I suppose, would ask me, you know, what's this fucking song about then? You know, and I'd say, well, I'm not really sure. And you know, I'd dredge up kind of stuff from my past, or sometimes from other people's past, in that it's not entirely autobiographical.
Alan and Roger, between them, had written a script. It was more of a descriptive nature as to what images might fall against the songs. And it was very short. It was, I think, about 35 pages long. And so, because Alan was rather embarrassed that it was such a short script, he actually added about 10 pages which had notes, 4 notes, blank pages at the end of the script. So we had about a 50-page, 45 to 50-page script.
At the end of the day, you know, whatever we'd discussed that day, which is this section of the film, Roger would go away and type it out. And what Jerry would do when once we'd left, he'd usually do like 1 or 2 images of what we'd discussed that day. And it gradually, during those days, it's built up into this very weird, surreal, kind of crazy storyboard.
When we first started the film with Alan, he had this idea of making a kind of storyboard of every frame in the film. He knew I couldn't do that, but he wanted me to do major parts of the film, and some of them I had already designed anyway for stage show and so on, and kind of evolved from that. So we worked in this room here in this house where the wall was covered with hundreds of images, which we would discuss and transpose and move around. And they were sometimes the briefest of little sketches, but they were my idea of what the scene should look like.
By and large, Pink's early life is autobiographical. When he starts trashing hotel rooms and things, that's something that I never got into. But quite a few people in my industry did. And there's a bit of Syd Barrett in there. The shaving of the body hair was part of his story. And then I guess the latest stuff, you know, where all the fascist stuff is possibilities for anyone who ever gets any power in any situation.
I think the film is about a burned-out rock star, burned out from too many shows, too much booze, too many drugs, sitting there, disintegrating in a hotel room somewhere, thinking about his life. At the heart of that is all the pain of his marriage, of his father dying, his fears of madness, his fears of alienation, his fears of oppression, the personal walls that we build around ourselves, and the walls that are erected in society because of being alienated from one another. This culminates into a total and utter nightmare, which then explodes with the judgment of his life in order to tear down that wall, in order for us to have some semblance of life. I think that's what it's about. On the other hand, I think you better ask Roger, because he's truly the only one who does know.
Alan's contribution was great in that when he became involved, he was very clear that there shouldn't be any concert footage, that there shouldn't be any film of a band in the film. There shouldn't be anything to do with the, you know, because my original attempts at writing a screenplay has developed a narrative around what was going on at a rock and roll show. And so when he got involved, we dumped all of that. I remember I'd written scenes at a certain point of, you know, of an audience at a stadium gig being bombed, and as they were being blown to bits, sort of applauding wildly.
It was an incredibly difficult task to actually find somebody to play Roger, basically. And I think that the choices of casting for that lead role were fairly narrow. There were not too many people who could take on the acting side as well as having a half-decent rock and roll voice.
I met with Bob, and I wasn't sure if he ever could act. Nobody could, you know. I mean, he was quite charismatic even in those days, and I think that the only way I could do it really was to do a screen test. And I gave him a scene from Midnight Express, which is actually quite a difficult scene to do, which is the courtroom scene. And he did it really brilliantly. I mean, he did it in an Irish accent, which was rather odd, but it was really good. We were kind of astonished at what a good actor he was. We now know how good an actor he is, but that was really how it came about. It was actors first. I looked at actors in London and New York, and I ended up with Bob.
The choice of Bob was risky. On the other hand, Roger had a certain amount of input as to who he would allow to play himself anyway. Roger was also worried about Bob's voice, whether Bob would actually be able to sing the songs. And I believe at one time we thought about actually Bob just mouthing Roger's words. But in the end, I think Alan convinced Roger. It was really Alan who convinced Roger that Bob was the best choice for the movie, and that also that Bob should re-record the numbers that we wanted him to sing on in front of the camera.
There was only one time we had an argument, was when he was during Comfortably Numb, when he's turning into a pink blob. That was rather uncomfortable for him, actually, in the middle of the night in a biscuit factory in Hammersmith when it was very, very cold, and all he had to cover him up was a pink slime. I think that's the only time when he thought I was taking advantage of him. But otherwise, he took to it very easily. The young Pink was... I did casting sessions, open calls, saw thousands of kids here in London, in Manchester, in Leeds, in Glasgow. And, you know, when you're looking for a kid like that, you just can't see enough of the kids, and then suddenly someone comes in who has some special quality, which I thought he had.